gracias a todos ustedes. Quiero saludar y agradecer especialmente a la Comisión Colombiana del Océano, al capitán Forero, por esta invitación, también al director ejecutivo de Coralina y a todos los miembros de su consejo con quienes hemos estado colaborando, al señor ministro también encargado de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación, científicos y comunidad presente. A nombre de National Geographic y la iniciativa Pristine Seas, queremos primero agradecer toda la hospitalidad que hemos tenido durante ya 2 meses. Ayer terminamos una expedición inédita a los mares colombianos, desde el Océano Pacífico, la costa pacífica y también al mar Caribe. Literalmente nos bajamos ayer del barco, que todavía está acá en el puerto, y algunos de los miembros del equipo se van en muy pocas horas. Pero para nosotros era muy importante tener al menos una oportunidad para compartir con ustedes lo que hicimos y lo que pudimos estudiar con nuestro equipo. Estuvimos embarcados en un barco que se llama Argo, y que ya van a ver cómo es el barco, pero lo más importante es que estuvimos acompañados de un grupo muy destacado de científicos internacionales y documentalistas. Quiero destacar el grupo de investigadoras e investigadores colombianos, que son de una calidad formidable, y espero que ustedes puedan conocerlos más, escucharlos, porque tienen mucho que decir, conocen este mar mejor que nadie, y por lo tanto tienen un recurso de conocimiento, un recurso humano tremendamente importante. Nosotros hemos trabajado codo a codo con este grupo, son cerca de 10 científicos de Colombia, y que nos han enseñado y nos han brindado toda su pasión y todo su profesionalismo para poder aprender cómo es el mar colombiano y trabajar con ellos. No quería dejar pasar la oportunidad para destacar esa colaboración. También quiero destacar que este esfuerzo que hicimos en esta expedición es la continuación de algo que se venía haciendo desde antes. No somos los primeros que llegamos a estas zonas, sino que hemos estado mirando también lo que se ha hecho y poder construir sobre esa base y poder conocer y correr las barreras del conocimiento para poder aportar con más información para que ustedes puedan tomar las decisiones que correspondan para proteger estos mares. Y también quiero destacar que la cooperación ha sido muy importante. Hemos estado trabajando con la Comisión Colombiana del Océano, que nos ha ayudado a articularnos con más de 20 instituciones, pero también muy de cerca con DIMAR, y de hecho nos acompaña el capitán Julián Quintero, que se integró a la expedición, también instituciones del Estado como parques nacionales y otras que estuvieron presentes. Y ha sido muy importante porque acá tenemos un desafío que debemos tomar muy en serio. El mundo está pasando por la crisis ambiental y climática más importante de toda su historia. Tenemos solamente una ventana de oportunidad. La verdad es que ya no tiene mucho sentido proyectar mucho más allá, porque si no hacemos algo ahora, vamos a perder la ventana de oportunidad para tomar las decisiones para salvar el planeta tal como lo conocemos. Estamos en el año 2022 y el mundo tiene que tomar ahora un rumbo distinto para poder salvar la biodiversidad, para poder controlar el cambio climático, para poder también frenar fenómenos que nacen del abuso de la naturaleza, como las pandemias, que también tienen un origen en la mala relación que hemos tenido con la naturaleza. La protección del mar y la tierra es el mejor antídoto para poder cambiar ese rumbo y resolver estos problemas. Pero no tenemos todo el tiempo para hacerlo, tiene que ser pronto, tiene que ser ahora. Celebro que Colombia se ha puesto en la ruta de proteger el 30% de sus mares. Ya lo anunció el presidente de la República, y también hemos visto a distintos líderes, también científicos y comunidades locales que han abrazado ese objetivo. Ese liderazgo es múltiple, no es solamente uno, sino que lo hemos visto en el Pacífico y lo hemos visto en el Caribe. Y esperamos que la información que hemos recopilado pueda servir para avanzar en esa línea, porque eso les va a ayudar a proteger la naturaleza, también a crear más trabajos, que derivan de la naturaleza y también estar mejor preparados para esta gran amenaza global que es el cambio climático. Me acompaña parte del equipo, solamente quiero mencionar que con nosotros está el doctor Alan Freelander, que es el jefe científico de Pristine Seas, y en el público también tenemos a algunos otros integrantes, como el doctor Quique Ballesteros, la doctora Paula Zapata, el doctor Diego Cardeñosa, el capitán Julián Quinteros, que estuvieron en la expedición. Vamos a dar una visión preliminar, pero no queríamos, como les digo, dejar el archipiélago de San Andrés, Providencia y Santa Catalina sin al menos compartir por primera vez con ustedes esta información. Todo lo que hacemos nosotros es para ustedes, no es para nosotros, no es que lo llevamos y eso queda enterrado en algún cajón, no. Esta información va a ser para ustedes, para que puedan tomar las decisiones que correspondan para proteger este enorme tesoro natural que tienen, pero que es un tesoro que está en peligro y que ya está sufriendo daños. Los dejo con el doctor Alan Freelander, que les va a contar de qué se trató nuestra expedición y algunos antecedentes sobre lo que pudimos estudiar. Muchas gracias.
Hola a todos, gracias por la invitación. Mi nombre es Alan Freelander, jefe científico de National Geographic Pristine Seas y profesor de la Universidad de Hawái. Mi español no es muy bueno y por esta charla es en inglés, lo siento. ¿Sigue? Okay, so, acá es mejor. So since 2008, National Geographic Pristine Seas has been surveying the last wild places in the ocean. We've conducted 37 expediciones, and had 25 marine protected areas protected, 6.5 million square kilometers of some of the last wild places in the ocean. We have surveyed from the Arctic to the Antarctic, coral reefs, kelp forests, in all of the oceans of the sea. We've produced a number of scientific papers, 34 documentary films, and the most important thing there is the creation of a large number of fully protected marine areas in some of the last wild places in the ocean. Sigue? Okay, because we go to some of the last wild places, most of these places have never been surveyed before. And because of that, we use a number of different methods. We use scuba diving down to 20 meters, then rebreathers down to 50. We use manned submersibles that can go down to 450 meters. Our deep drop cameras have been to the bottom of the ocean, as deep as they go, several thousand meters. We also use a variety of different types of camera systems to explore and understand the entire ecosystem. Sigue? Okay, so what are the lessons learned from the last wild places over the last 12 plus years? They're dominated by large predators, tiburones, jurel, mero, gigante, and this is the norm of what systems are supposed to look like. These last wild places are dominated by large predators, but they've been removed from most ecosystems on Earth, so we don't know what these systems are supposed to look like. So these are really important base líneas to understand how ecosystems functioned in the past. They also have iconic species, also polares and whales, dolphins, all kinds of species are kind of typical of what we see in these remote last wild places. Species endemical, so many of these places are remote and far removed from many other places, and as a result they have species that are found nowhere else on Earth. Therefore, they're really important biodiversity hotspots and really important for conservation for biodiversidad. Architectural species, these are species that create the three-dimensional structures, so kelp forests, corales, all these species create the structure that creates all the biodiversity that we see in these pristine locations. And finally, intact ecosystems. When all of the components of the ecosystem are in place, the system functions much more efficiently and also it's more resilient and more resistant to climate change. Sigue? Hey? Sigue. Okay, so now to the expedition to Colombia. So we spent the last 2 months covering from the offshore waters to the Pacific coast to the Caribbean coast of Colombia. We covered over 2,500 nautical miles over the past 2 months, and we surveyed the submarine mountains off the Pacific coast, then went to the Gulf of Triboga, and then finally to Bajo Nuevo and Serranía. And this was truly a collaborative expedition with the Colombian Ocean Commission, the Ministerio de Ambiente, DIMAR, Carolina, Cochelco, Invamar, national parks, and a number of academic and NGO institutions. So it was really an amazing opportunity for us to work with all the various institutions into Colombia to explore the entire part of Colombia's waters from the remote Pacific all the way to the remote Caribbean. Okay, so we got a lot done during the last 2 months. We had over 543 hours diving underwater, surveying, filming, creating a documentary film, doing scientific investigations. We had mesophotic cameras that go down to 100 metros. We had 42 hours. We used pelagic cameras to survey atún, ballena, whales and dolphins out in the open ocean, 500 hours of that. We had deep water cameras that went down to 4,000 meters in some of the deep waters of Colombia. And finally, we did submersible dives as well. So we got a lot accomplished in the 2 months surveying all of Colombia's waters. Okay, so the first part of the expedition was in Yurapari, Malpelo, Colones y Lomas. And we surveyed the shallow seamount by navigator, numero uno there, with the submersible, and then we surveyed all of those other seamounts using our deep drop cameras and the cameras pelagico. Next. Okay, and what we found was on these shallow seamounts, there's an amazing diversity of life. The white corales, stylastra, and lots of esponja. And so these species are long-lived, they're slow-growing, and they're really important to the structure of the entire ecosystem. We also saw this rare merlo that was over 1.5 meters in length. The reported size elsewhere is less than 50% of that, and so this species is rare, but also extremely large. This grouper probably lives 50-plus years. And so any type of fishing that's going to take place is going to be really detrimental. We saw lots of palangres on the seamounts, and so there's obviously lots of fishing pressure going on. If you remove one animal that lives 50-plus years, it takes a long time to recover, and also the corals are very fragile and break very easily. Sigue? Okay, in the deeper waters, we found amazing diversity, chimeras, morid cods, grenadiers, rat tails, deep water skates, a number of different animals that weren't previously recorded from Colombia's waters because not much is known about the deep sea. And, you know, we have surveyed the deep environment throughout the tropical Eastern Pacific, in Costa Rica, in Chile, and other locations, Malpelo, and this is the highest abundance and diversity we've seen anywhere of deep water animals in the entire tropical Eastern Pacific. Okay, at the end of the first part of the expedition, President Duque came to Triboga and met the boat. He went down in this submersible, and he made, you know, the bold proclamation that he was going to expand Malpelo and made the commitment to protect 30% of Colombia's waters by the end of his administration. And that shows real leadership on the part of Colombia as an ocean leader. Colombia has amazing biodiversity, both on land and in the ocean. And so this strong commitment, I think, is really important and really identifies Colombia as a leader in ocean conservation. Okay, so from there we went to the Gulf of Triboga, Cabo Corrientes, and surveyed all along the coast in that water. And this is truly a wild place. This is where the rainforest meets the ocean. It's some of the wettest spots on Earth, mucho lluvia, and it's known to have, there's no roads, poco persona, and so because of that, it's got a huge amount of biodiversity on land. But the big question is, what was the biodiversity like underwater? And what we found was an amazingly productive ecosystem, full of gorgonians, 5 species of gorgonian in this one photo here, large amounts of small fish, but we didn't see a lot of big fish. And the amount of habitat is very limited. Much of it is soft bottom. And so when there is hard bottom, we saw a lot of fishing line, a lot of fishing pressure, and not a lot of big fish. But that said, because of the area having such high productivity, it really has the potential to recover if there's more marine protection put in place. See? Okay, so now on to the Caribbean coast that we're most interested in. So we left the Pacific coast, we went through the Panama Canal, we started in San Andreas, and then 30 hours later, we ended up in Bajo Nuevo and Serranía. Okay, so in 1999, that's me up there a long time ago, I had the pleasure of working with Carolina and with Invamar on a baseline study of the Seaflower Biosphere Reserve. Along with that project, we did participatory mapping with fishermen from both San Andreas and Providencia. I had the pleasure of going to San Andreas, Providencia, Quitasueño, Roncador, and Serrana, but never made it up to Bajo Nuevo or Serranía, so I was pretty excited about being able to go to those places on this expedition. Okay, and what we found at Bajo Nuevo was pretty interesting and encouraging. The corals, the sponges, the gorgonian communities were quite healthy. We did see some signs of coral disease, but as we all know, reefs in the Caribbean are in very bad shape. Overfishing, pollution, disease have really impacted all of the coral reefs in the Caribbean. So this is one of the last refuges of fairly healthy coral reefs that we see. But poco peces grande. In fact, we saw one Jamaican fishing boat while we were there. It had 25 fishermen on it with 6 different pangas. And so this is obviously happening a lot. And so we didn't see any large fish at Bajo Nuevo. We didn't see any langosta to speak of, and we saw lots of dead conch down there. So there's obviously a lot of fishing pressure that's taking place at Bajo Nuevo. But again, the ecosystem is fairly healthy, so if proper protection is put in place, the ecosystem has the potential to recover. The encouraging signs are there's 2 species of critically endangered corals. This is Acropora cervicornis, the staghorn coral, and Acropora palmata, the elkhorn coral. And these 2 species are critically endangered throughout the Caribbean. And they seem to be fairly healthy at Bajo Nuevo, less so at Serranía, and that's an encouraging sign. This could be one of the last refuges for these 2 species anywhere in the Caribbean. We also did some deep submersible dives with the 3-person submersible down to 150 meters, and we saw these sheer vertical walls with beautiful sponge communities, very diverse. Not much had been known about the deeper water communities up in these areas prior to this expedition, so this helps contribute to the baseline needed to better manage this place. Okay, so when we went from Bajo Nuevo to Serranía, we saw a somewhat different story. There's a small military installation on Serranía, and we saw a lot more fish at Serranía than we did at Bajo Nuevo. Lots of grunts, we saw some groupers, some pargo, and so even though we know there's a lot of fishing going on from Nicaragua, especially in the northern part of the atoll, The areas close to the military base seems like there's protection going on, even though they don't have a lot of capabilities to prevent illegal fishing. The base itself is enough of a deterrent that we saw many more fish there than we did at Bajo Nuevo. Próximo. Okay, one of the most inspiring things I think about the work at both Bajo Nuevo, but particularly in Serranía, was just the abundance of sharks. We had 11 different species of sharks that we observed on our cameras or that we caught during the expedition. And so that's a really encouraging sign. Sharks in general are in bad shape globally and in the Caribbean in particular. So this is an important refuge for sharks, and these animals travel long distances, but the fact that we saw several tigre and lemon sharks and even great hammerheads, it was a very encouraging sign. Próximo. Okay, so to answer this question about what the sharks are doing, where they're going, we work with our colleague Diego Cadenas, and we caught a number of shark species and we put satellite tags on them. So these satellite tags are going to pop off in 180 days, and we're going to get a lot of information. We're going to know where the shark went, how deep it went, how much time it spent at different depths, and this can help tell us a lot about the behavior of these animals, but also how better to conserve them. Próximo. Okay, so one of the big questions is, without a lot of fish, what are the sharks eating? And so we used some deeper water cameras that went down to 100 meters or so, and we saw some really big metal and lots of pargo down there as well. A few other species, unfortunately, lionfish as well, seem to be everywhere around the islands. But so there's hope that these deep water habitats, because they're healthier, they can help repopulate the shallow water areas if greater protection is put in place. Próximo. Okay, we also use these cameras Pelagico to look at the open ocean ecosystem. And we saw several species of shark, including this really rare thresher shark, and the tiburon matillo también, some dolphins. And so the offshore ecosystem seems to be fairly healthy at this point, and so it's encouraging to see the diversity of life in this offshore waters. Next. Okay, there was very little known about the deep waters of this region prior to expedition, so we deployed our cameras down to several hundred, up to 1,000 meters, and we saw some interesting sharks. We saw this toro, the alopius, the big-eyed thresher. We have this one cat shark down in the corner there that we're not even sure what it is. That was at 600 and some odd meters. So exploring these deeper water habitats is really giving us a window into the diversity that exists within Colombia's waters that really wasn't known before. Okay, so to wrap it up, we just recently published a paper in the journal Science giving guidelines for marine protected areas globally. And the oceans of the past, as I've talked about, were full of life, big fish, really productive ecosystems with a lot of structure. Today, we don't see that. In most places, many of the big fish are gone, the bottom is degraded. And the best hope for the future is by creation of marine protected areas. And not all marine protected areas are the same. Fully protected and highly protected areas will allow systems to recover to their potential. But areas that are only lightly protected, it only takes a small amount of fishing pressure to really knock down these species. Many of these species are long-lived and fragile, and so if we only have limited protection, we don't see the full benefits of marine protection. What's really needed is to have large areas that include the entire ecosystem for the animals that will move around and benefit. And so that's really my hope as far as moving forward, that we can try to achieve both globally within Colombian waters and elsewhere. So there's a lot of potential. We spent the last 2 months going all over Colombia, from the deepest parts of the Pacific to the coastal parts of the wildest places left in Central and South America to the remote Caribbean. And what we saw is encouraging, but yet we see lots of signs of fishing pressure everywhere we went. And so, the hope is that Colombia's oceans are still relatively healthy compared to many places around the world. So if they increase their marine protection now, they can not go the ways of other countries, and the potential is great to provide all the benefits that we need well into the future. Gracias.
Buenos días. Primero agradecer por esta oportunidad a la Comisión Colombiana del Océano, que de igual forma en coordinación con la Dirección General Marítima me fue permitido participar como inspector a bordo de la embarcación Argo en la expedición de Pristine Sea. Primero quiero manifestar que este tipo de oportunidades no solamente ayudan en gran medida desde el aspecto técnico-científico para la mejora del manejo y administración de este tipo de áreas, sino que adicionalmente crea espacios de oportunidad que son formidables. Creo que dentro del tiempo que tuvimos desde el 16 de marzo hasta el 20 de abril, en todos los ejercicios y actividades de investigación científica que se realizaron, no solamente intercambiamos conocimientos técnicos, sino que adicionalmente logramos intercambiar experiencias y de igual forma ideas, que yo creo que este sería el principal mensaje que puedo dar en ese tipo de espacios, y es que la seguridad ante este tipo de áreas es un reto demasiado grande, y creemos que después de haber compartido con investigadores de talla mundial, se pueden contar con distintas herramientas al día de hoy que puedan llegar a propender con una mejor seguridad, pensando desde la innovación y la tecnología. Quiero de antemano dar las gracias a los investigadores nacionales, Luis, Paula, Diego. Creo que sirvió mucho toda la retroalimentación que desde su perspectiva en la academia contribuye para que la Dirección General Marítima desde esos espacios pueda seguir aportando de una manera oportuna, y no siendo más que agradecer a la Comisión Colombiana del Océano por los espacios que logra brindar hacia la Dirección General Marítima para que podamos seguir aportando desde ciencia y soberanía. Muchas gracias.